Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Author Your Life podcast. Today on the podcast, we have Ismene Cole. Ismene is a coach who's passionate about helping people live out their greatest potential and develop the confidence and courage to shine. She's a qualified therapist who has had her own practice for 5.5 years. She's appeared a number of times on BBC Radio, including Happy Hour, Dr. Phil's show, and Becky Walsh's show. And she is also the co-owner of The Positive News. The Positive News is an inspiring current affairs magazine that publishes quality, independent journalism about progress and possibility. When much of the media is doom and gloom, instead, Positive News is the world's first media organization dedicated to reporting on what's going right. Positive News magazine offers inspiring stories from across the globe. Now, in this interview with Ismene, we cover a number of interesting concepts. Some of the things that we talk about include how to focus on others, not yourself, during challenging times, how to discover new things about yourself through journaling. We talk about when we look after ourselves, we create a ripple effect that helps others. Ismene discusses why losing her mother at 17 was the best thing that ever happened to her. And when your heart is telling you to make a decision, don't listen to what your head is telling you. It is my great pleasure to present to you Ismene Cole. Ismene, welcome to the Author Your Life podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So Ismene, I'd like to kick off and get started. I'd like the audience and the listeners to learn a little bit more about you and particularly what has led you to this place. For those who are just on the audio only, we've got the flowers and the candles in the background. What has led you to this wonderful, peaceful,
just
serene
pink
place?
as well. Remember that's pink. It's important.
So Ismene, why did you become a therapist?
The big important question. So I think for me, it came from a real passion. So when my mum died when I was 17, that was a huge moment in my life, as you can imagine. And at that point, I thought that I was okay for a while, because I think that's the thing with grief, we kind of go into shock. That can be part of it. And then about 8 months later, I can only describe what I had as a kind of a breakdown. I mean, as you'll see, I really like doing my makeup and high heels and looking after myself. And, you know, after about 7 days of just kind of looking at a wall for what I would think was 20 minutes at a time, but I'd actually kind of look at my watch and it had been 3 or 4 hours. And I felt really anxious, not that I knew what that was at the time. I was really suffering with depression again, not that I knew what that was at the time. And a wonderful lady that had come in to help, she was helping with the cooking and the cleaning for my sister and I. And she said, maybe you want to consider counselling. And at that point, I'd had counselling before and didn't find it that helpful because I don't think it was maybe quite the right timing for me. But at that point, I would have done anything because I just felt so completely desperate and lost. And quite frightened really by my symptoms of anxiety. I didn't know racing thoughts or, you know, having nightmares was part of anxiety because I was 17. So you don't kind of know that. Maybe 17-year-olds are a bit more aware, but they certainly weren't when I was 17. And that moment, even though I had no idea at the time, just became a completely different life for me. It was really powerful. Helped me store for a really long time. And that helped me not only at the time getting through my grief, but also helping me with skills and learning to like myself and being kind to myself So I think from that moment on, I just had this incredible passion for it because I knew that it worked. But it took me quite a few years of being in different professions to actually come back to it as a professional, and then really get onto the personal development path to later then train to be a coach too.
Well, when you lose a parent at 17, I mean, I lost mine at 23, which is also quite young, but 17 is even younger. How did you begin to come out of that? How did you begin to move past the grief into the life that you have now?
Well, I think my situation was quite unique at the time, that I was living with my sister, who was only 12 at the time. And I can remember, and I quite often think this in work about having a purpose, that sometimes we can't turn up fully for ourselves. And I was in some really destructive relationships and quite harmful behavior at that time too. So it was quite a big leap for me, not just getting through the grief. But I think sometimes we need things outside of ourselves. And I can just remember looking at my sister at being only 12 and then thinking, wow, I'm kind of your role model now.
Yeah.
That was really big. And I think also when I started to go into counselling, it really started to open up who I could be and what life could be. But I think there was something that was even more important there, that even though it was very painful when my mum died, in a weird way, which sounds strange, it was one of the best things for me. It was the best learning for me, because we all think that we've got time.
Yeah.
And we do, don't we? We all think that we've got time. And there was something so powerful about seeing my mum die when, I was only 17, and realising, and my mum was an incredible woman, very intelligent, very much free spirit like me, but died with a lot of her potential within her. That was a huge lesson for me right back then, is meaning you must live to the fullest. And it kind of almost scared me into deciding that whatever happened, how many times I had to fall on my face, how many times I had to fail, I had to know and die knowing that I'd given it my best shot.
Yeah.
I think it was that combination of all those things that really gave me my fight to recover, and not only recover, but thrive.
No, I resonate with that hugely. Obviously, we've gone through similar situations, and I think had similar realizations of you don't realize, on a rational level, oh, one day I'm going to die. Rationally, one day we're all going to die. But I don't think you really connect with that emotionally, spiritually, until you actually see death, and then you go, oh my God, it's true. People do actually die. We do only have a limited amount of time on this earth. And the question I think we've got to ask ourselves is, what are we going to do with that time? What is important in your life? Who do you want to be and what do you want to do?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and then I think that can be a real motivation and a drive, because life can be challenging, and going after our goals or our dreams or our best life can be challenging. There can be obstacles, it can be frightening, we can worry what people think. But I think when you've had experiences like that, and that's what I mean about it being one of the best things, clearly not my mum dying, but the lesson that I learned from that really gave me that perspective to move beyond fear. And then the more that you do that, the braver you get, right?
Yeah. When you started going through the counselling, you started to have these realizations and almost these awakenings of what was possible for you and how you could move past this place that you were in. Can you remember anything from that time, those sessions, something that really stood out to you and helped you during that period?
Well, there was a couple, actually. One was I am more than what happens to me. That was really powerful. Yeah, that was a big one for me. And the other one was I am responsible for my life. So it might not be my fault that life's been difficult. My fault that, absolutely. But I am responsible for my life, how I feel, the people that are in my life, what I do, what it's like. And that was incredible to learn that at such a young age.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's huge. I think that's a very empowering thing, that no matter what's going on around us, just knowing that we have that personal responsibility, there's always something we can do to influence it. There's always something that we can do to change, even if it's these tiny, minuscule things. I think is really important to understand, especially when you're in that situation, because you can feel like the victim, and understandably so, because everything is happening to you, but actually you have that control to make things happen for you.
It's taking the power back, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We're not in control necessarily of what's going on out there or what other people are, but we do have that power within ourselves. And I think that, yeah, that it's challenging, but it's amazing.
So let's fast forward on this journey a little bit. You go through the counselling, you start to come out of this period of bereavement, and it takes you some time to come back to realising that maybe it's you who wants to do the counselling, you who wants to give this gift to other people that was bestowed to you. How did that come about? Was there a particular moment, a particular spark where you're like, hey, maybe I should become a counsellor?
Well, interestingly, I'd always said when people ask me, do you want to be a therapist or a coach or whatever? And I was like, no, I don't want to be. But it is interesting where life kind of takes you. And I think quite often people or people that I work with or people that I know say, yeah, but I don't know what my purpose is, or I don't know how. And I always say, don't worry about the how, just go out and try things and it'll become apparent. So I think that was really, really clear for me. It was just kind of trial and error of working in different industries. So I came out of university, I'd done some volunteer work when I was in university the first time. In a volunteer counselling place, which I really enjoyed. And then I came out and worked in child protection and social services, which is pretty intense.
Yeah.
And I kind of learned, okay, so the bit I'm really enjoying is the work that they give to charities. So I'll go over to charities. So for a number of years, I worked in lots of amazing different charities in different roles and running projects and running groups, and loved that, training. But again, was thinking I like this, but there's still something missing. I kind of missed that one-on-one work. And then again, I went through the next period of my life that was really challenging, where I went through a big breakup and my granddad died, who was very much a huge part of my life. And then again, found myself thinking, okay, great, what next? And at that point, I don't know how I ended up on a counselling course. But I think I felt this void and I needed to fill it. I just found a new job that I was working 25 hours a week, so I could. And I can remember once I got over the being freaked out about having to sit in a circle and talk about your feelings to a group of 25 strangers. As it progressed, I went home to my housemate and said, I think I've made a terrible decision. But I went back the next week and I suddenly thought, it's here. This is where I can bring my life experience. This is where I can bring my work experience. This is something I can be really good at and something I can be really passionate about. And that's remained. I've just gone on to train as a coach as well. So, that was the start of really finding where I belonged. Yeah.
There's just something you mentioned there. I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about. You go in that first day sharing with 25 strangers, you think, oh my God, this is not what I signed up for. What have I done? What makes you go back in the next day, and what helps you to start to open up and enter that place of vulnerability?
I think maybe it's the same as everything that I think to get through my fear. I'm always looking at the bigger picture. So I'm always asking myself, if I can get through this fear, what might, kind of lie out there? So either I will think about it in terms of contribution. If I can get past this fear of sharing this about myself, who else will benefit? That's a big driver for me. Or personally, because I'm always wanting to live fully, it is, if I can get past this, what might expand? So I think when I was sat in that course, it was that part of me that knows, even though they're kind of like the negative committee was thinking, what on earth are you doing? This is going to be awful. Shut down, hide. Yeah. The other part of me just had this knowing of this is where you're meant to be. Keep going. So I tend to listen to that more than I listen to fear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've had to make a lot of difficult decisions along this journey, facing that fear, being vulnerable. What would you say is the most difficult decision that you've had to make?
Good question. There's been quite a few. I think it's always, but they always end up being my best decisions, is to really live in my truth. So quite often what my head wants to say and what my heart is saying are two completely different things. Because my head's saying it's not safe, keep to what you know. I'm sure it's very similar for a lot of people. And I think every time I have to make a big decision, my head's always saying to me, it's not going to be okay. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Qualified, you're not this. And it kind of goes on. And I think every really big, difficult decision has meant that I've just had to take a leap. I didn't know if it was okay. I didn't know if I was going to be able to pay the bills. I didn't know what my life would have looked like jumping off that, and whether or not that's been leaving relationships, going full-time self-employed. Huge. I didn't have enough money to pay the bills at that time. I didn't have enough clients. I'd never worked for myself. I'd never worked in a profit organization. I had no idea what I was doing. But in those moments where I've taken the biggest leap, not only has it not only been okay, it's been the start of a completely different life, but they've been really challenging because all the fear parts of me have said, don't do it. It's not going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's an incredible power in making decisions. That's come up once or twice in some of the other interviews on the podcast, is when you make that decision and you really commit to it and you recognize that, yes, this is what I want to do. It's amazing how the circumstances around and the universe seems to conspire into making that happen. Perhaps it's still not easy. Perhaps it doesn't work out quite as you wanted it to or how you expected it to. But when you've really committed, and you've committed from a place of the heart, I think that's really important that you mentioned there. Committing from the heart and making that decision, it's incredible what actually starts to happen for you when you really truly commit from that place.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I guess that is us turning up. So because we're going into a place quite often of complete unknown. Mm-hmm. So that is terrifying, and sometimes we can't see or be sure that it's going to be okay. So actually kind of going into the unknown takes an awful lot of kind of courage, I think, to live out our best life. You have to be hugely courageous. It's brave. Maybe people aren't going to like it. The amount of times I've made big decisions in my life and they said, oh, don't want to leave that full-time job.
Yeah.
Going to do that whole self-employment thing. Because there's other people's fears. So we don't always have the support even of the people that are around us, not because anyone's trying to be horrible, but because they're trying to take care of us. So it's really walking your own path and your own truth. And that might be very different to how you've been brought up or what we've been conditioned to think. So, but I think there's something in what you said, and that's absolutely true in my life, that when I really commit to that, despite those things, it's always incredible. It's always an incredible journey.
Mm-hmm. I really like the expression there of walking your path and living your truth. This is something that clearly is a very big part of how you live your life and how you aspire to live your life. But that's really tough. It's tough to walk your own path. It's tough to live your truth.
And it can be lonely at points as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because ultimately, sometimes you're the only person who sees your own vision, who knows where it is that you want to go, and other people, sometimes you can't communicate that vision to them or they can't see it. And that can be really difficult and that can be isolating. Yeah.
And it can also be going back to that vulnerability, because I think whenever we kind of, I think about it almost like giving birth to ideas, they come out kind of not yet strong because they're not quite developed. It can feel quite crushing or vulnerable to say, oh, this is what I believe in, or this is what I stand for, or this is what I'm going to go after. Because I think a lot of people struggle to go after their dreams for all the reasons that we've talked about. So that can also be a real vulnerability.
Yeah. Is there anything that you do on a day-by-day basis that prepares you and allows you every day to go into the day with this intention of, I'm going to walk my path and I'm going to live my truth today?
Yeah, so if you've ever heard any interview, I'm always talking about this. It's probably boring for people, but it's because it really works for me. I mean, I started a good couple of years doing my morning routine. And honestly, that's been a complete game changer for me, because I do not, this should be on part of my slogan, I do not wake up inspirational.
Yeah.
Seriously, yeah. I do not wake up, on the odd occasion if we're having a really good day, but I do not wake up inspirational, and I've got to work on it. And I don't feel happy all the time. I don't feel positive all the time. I'm deeply emotional, so I tend to be all over the place a lot of the time because I feel things really deeply. But having that routine is like my anchor. So I might wake up in a bad mood, or I might have a bad back or whatever, but by the time I've journaled, and I started doing a while ago, actually, after I saw her in the Hay House writing thing, Julia Cameron's morning pages.
Oh yeah.
So I wake up in the morning, got that by my bed, get my cup of herbal tea, get back into bed, light my candle and set the intention for the day. And then I just write for 3 pages. And it's fascinating, because I first started doing it for 21 days. I try and set myself these new habits. And I just haven't stopped being able to do it, because it's just amazing. Because it's like having a conversation with myself. So the first page is everything I already know. It's like on the top of my brain. And then after about halfway through the second page, it suddenly gets really interesting, because I'm like, oh, is that why I was feeling that? And oh, is that what I want? And then by the third page, I know things about myself that I did not know when I woke up. And I just love that. It feels very clearing. I always feel amazing after it, or curious or excited or whatever it is. So that's a really good way of clearing my mind. And then I go downstairs and I do yoga about 6 days a week, just my own practice. And then I meditate. And sometimes if I've got time, depending what time I start work, I'll watch something inspirational or listen to affirmations. And that really, really sets me up for the day.
How long does that take you, roughly?
Now I've been doing the full morning pages probably an hour.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
What?
No, definitely no more than that.
Yeah. What? I'm just going to get into the nitty-gritty details here. What style of yoga do you do? Is there any particular school that you follow?
So I've been doing yoga for like quite a few years, so I just amalgamate it. I mean, the class that I go to is hatha yoga, sorry. But I'm kind of quite a big believer in taking from different things. So I might do a little bit of Ashtanga, or I might do something that's much more mindful, or yin yoga, which is much more meditation based. So I just go with how I feel at the time. How does my body feel? Am I having like 600 ideas a second? Do I need grounding?
Yeah.
Do I need waking up? So I reconnect with myself and go from that point.
What about your meditation? What's your style of meditation?
So again, because I'm such an ideas person, what I generally need is grounding, because otherwise I'm off. So if I'm feeling particularly all over the place, or having loads of ideas, or too inspired, and I can't concentrate, I'll do things like silent meditation, a lot of breath work. Sometimes I'll chant. I'm really feeling like I want to go for it. Or I do guided meditations too.
Oh, nice. Good variety there. You've used this word grounding, and I think it's so important to have this grounding as part of your morning. Is there anything that you do during the day when perhaps you lose that grounding when you get wrapped up in clients, or you're wrapped up in the creative process, and you start to lose control, and things kind of get stressful and out of sorts. Is there anything that you do to come back to that place that you've managed to establish in the morning?
Yeah, and this is something I've just got back to, actually. This is something that I know that works for me, but I've been rethinking a lot of stuff recently, so I've just gone back to it. And what I find is the more I've got on my to-do list, the quicker I want to work, but actually the less productive I am, because I'm this and this and this and this, and then I go into overwhelm. So that part of me is like the boss. I call it the boss and the fairy. And the fairy wants to float around, and the boss always wants to be doing things. So I try and get them to negotiate. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But a really good way of bringing myself back to center, because that's another thing I do every day now, is I will just sit and center myself and breathe and not do anything for 5 to 10 minutes. I might look out the window, I might just connecting with my breath. I might, if I've got here and I've lit the fire, I might just watch that, or I've got a candle, I might watch that. So I just really bring myself back to my heart, really. I think that's the thing for me. It's like making sure that my heart and my head are connected. And just having those couple, I might do that once or twice a day. And then that just keeps me in alignment, that keeps me centered and keeps me grounded. It's just simple, free, but always works.
Oh, that's brilliant. You've described a very challenging journey, and throughout you've given all of this advice and strategies on how you've stayed grounded through the process, how you've pushed through, how you've come through to the other side. Is there any advice that you'd give to people who, if they're going through challenge, if they feel that their life is in turmoil and is haywire, what would you say to them to help them to get through it?
I think 2 things that have really helped me is, number 1, feel your feelings. That feel quite because even though that feels really difficult, that is the journey. So emotions need to be processed. So if it's a natural thing, isn't it, to want to be motivated towards pleasure and motivated away from pain. So I think if we're feeling what we perceive as like negative emotions, we just want to shut it off or bury it or avoid it or get busy or whatever it is. But actually that just builds up and then starts coming out in different ways. So I think when we are in pain or our life's difficult, that's our invitation. It's like an alarm bell that's saying, okay, so maybe not this way, or maybe this isn't right, or maybe this needs to be looked at, or maybe this part of me needs love and compassion. And I think when we ignore that just builds up. And that was definitely my journey for a huge part of my life. I was terrified of feeling the feelings, but that caused so many problems because I had to try and avoid them or get rid of them or mask them. And that's that going back to vulnerability and going back to connection, that we have our answers. But if we're always cutting ourselves off, we lose that inner wisdom of what to do that's different. So number 1, look at it, be prepared to look at it, even if it's difficult. And number 2 is that we don't need to do things on our own. And this is another big thing about how I've got to where I get, and I've still got loads of support around me. We're so much better when we're together with people. We're so much stronger when we've got support. We're so much more resilient when we've got someone to kind of bash ideas out with. We're so much happier when other people believe in us. And I think the other thing that I've learned and I'm a big advocate for is that it's okay to ask for support. That isn't failing. Me, that is moving towards being successful. And if you look at any person that is uber successful, they've always got a team of support around them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to make. I'm glad you brought it up. You said there, feel your feelings, and it's the most simple instruction in the world, and it's also one of the most difficult at the same time. And I'm thinking particularly for my gender and for guys, we we really struggle with this stuff, is being connected to our feelings, connected to our emotions. It's a journey I've had to make myself, and I'm still very much on the journey of learning how to embrace my feelings and emotions more. Do you have any pieces of advice or techniques that you can use to start to feel your feelings a little bit more?
Well, I think if we haven't been connected to our feelings for a long time, it can sometimes feel a bit unbearable. So some things that I say to my clients, if they're in that place of it feeling unbearable, so if you're on a pain scale of maybe like 8 to 10, to almost, I know it sounds really prescriptive, but it does help. Rather than the panic of, oh my God, I've got to sit here and feel my feelings for like hours and I'm going to drown and it's not going to be okay, to actually almost put a timer on it. So I'm going to just sit here and sit with this feeling and I'm going to breathe in it, but just for 5 minutes. I'm just going to make that connection for 5 minutes. And then over time, you can build that up. And another thing that I find really, really powerful that I can't live without, and particularly when I'm having a really tough time, is, and this is again something that we can do with ourselves, we turn up for ourselves, is doing things like journaling. Because, you know, a bit like the morning pages, you know, it's that conversation with yourself. And we know that if we feel bad normally and we chat to a friend, or it actually feels good that someone's interested and we've got somewhere to go. But we often forget that we can give that to ourselves. So that when we turn up and say, what you've got to say is important, I'm here for you, I'm listening, and I care about you, actually that heals a lot of the feelings. Whereas when we're not feeling our feelings, what we're actually saying to ourselves is, I don't care, it's not important, and I'm going to hurt you even more because I'm going to leave you in a place where you feel upset alone. But we often don't think about it like that. But we know that instinctively to other people. Very few of us would see someone that was upset, a friend, and ignore them or say, God, you're bloody stupid, I can't believe that, criticize them. But that's the kind of internal process that we have for ourselves quite often.
Yeah, very much so. So we're talking about feelings, we're talking about emotions, and one of the themes that's come up a couple of times is the people that we have in our life, is the supportive people, is the connection that we have, and your personal story is very much driven by connection and love and relationship. So what I'd like to find out, Ismene, is how do you think we can bring more love into the world, the most powerful feeling of them all?
It's a gorgeous one. Well, you know, it's boring. I keep talking about the self, but no, not really. But I do genuinely believe that, and again, this is my experience, that the more we are compassionate to ourselves, the more that we turn up for ourselves, the more that we have self-awareness about why we do what we do, naturally our capacity for love, compassion, and understanding for other people is tenfold. You know, because none of us mean it. I know when I've been in my most unhappy points in my life, that's affected people around me. Maybe I haven't been able to turn up for them because I've been lost in my own stuff, or I don't know, maybe I wasn't that nice, not because I wanted to be not nice, but just because, again, I was lost in my own stuff. And if you kind of look around in the world, in the news, there's so much fear. Because there's a loss of two things: depth within ourselves, but also with other people, and connection. But it's very hard to be connected to other people and the world and bring that when we're not connected to ourselves. So something that I feel super passionate about is that when I'm working with clients, I'm not just working one-on-one. Actually, one person has an awful lot of influence in the world. Maybe when we're nicer to ourselves, we're better partners, we're better with our children, we're better with our colleagues, we're better with our staff, we feel more passionate about doing amazing things in the world. And I think really that's the second part of our stepping into our greatness. The first is self-mastery for me, and the second part is contribution to the world. And I think that's just a natural evolution, really, that when you find out all this amazing stuff and that you don't need to get stuck, and I think we naturally want to go out and tell other people about it.
Whew, that was very powerful to hear you say that, is recognizing the ripple effect that we have, and we can really underestimate ourselves sometimes. Whether that's, you were talking about the example of doing one-to-one work. Yeah, that isn't one-to-one work, because if you're helping someone in pain, they're not the only one in pain. Their parents are in pain, worried about their child. Their partner is in pain, worried about the person that they love. Their children are in pain, worrying about their mom or worrying about their dad. And recognizing that the change you make in one person's life ripples out. And every time you have an interaction, every time you have a conversation, that's your opportunity to drop a stone and make a ripple. And I think we should really give ourselves more credit for what we're able to bring into the world if we really, again, it comes back to setting intentions and making that decision to create that ripple effect.
And also recognize it, although it sometimes can feel scary to shine, it can feel scary to succeed, it can feel, insecure sometimes, or certainly vulnerable. Going back to what else motivates me, it's like when we can do that, we're quite often unaware of what effect that has on other people, because then they're going, well, they're nice to themselves, maybe I can be nice to themselves. They're going out and sharing their gifts in the world, then maybe I can do that. And I think that's the other thing, that we need these positive role models, because that, I'm at the belief that when we shine, we give other people the permission to shine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think we're desperate for that more in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So you shared a lot of advice, a lot of wisdom in our time together. But there's one person that I'd like you to give some wisdom to. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is education. And I think all of these things we're talking about, all of these principles, all of these concepts, they're powerful, they're useful, but so often we're sharing them with adults. So often we're sharing them with people in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, who have all of this pain, all of this hurt, all of this baggage that they're bringing in, and we're using these principles to try and help them to take away the layers and take away the barriers. What I'd love to do, and what I'd love to do in my work and see other people doing in the future, is bringing this stuff into young people, into teenagers, into children. So my question to you is, I've got a 5-year-old here and they're about to go into the big wide world. What advice would you give this 5-year-old to help them live as fulfilling a life as they possibly can?
You always matter. You're perfect just as you are. And that you can achieve anything that you want. And also, there's something there about difference. It's like your difference makes you unique. It's okay to be different. We don't have to be like everyone else. Mm-hmm. Follow your own path.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing with my young 5-year-old that I've got here. What are you grateful for, Ismene?
Do you know, I try and live in gratitude. I think it's something that has served me through some pretty horrific points in my life. And I think it's my anchor that I always go back to, like whenever I'm really struggling, and the times when I've been really depressed in my life and it felt actually quite painful to even breathe, that kind of depression. And you think, oh my God, I'm just not going to ever get out of this. And actually going back to after my mum died and kind of having that breakdown, the only things I could do at that point, one of them was just to sit and write down. I'd read it somewhere in a magazine or something. I was only just starting to learn about personal development then. And it was something about like find something that you're grateful for. But at that point, all I could do was, I'm grateful that I'm breathing. I'm grateful that it was sunny. I'm grateful. But that's really stayed with me, actually. So I just, obviously I'm grateful for the big things. I'm grateful that I get to work for myself in a way that I feel passionate about. I'm grateful for being healthy. I've had a lot of people in my family be ill, so that is never kind of surpassed me. But I think more than ever, I just try and be grateful for even all the little small things in my life. And because I think they're the things that we can miss. I think most people know or feel gratitude for when the big things or the amazing things that we've been working for, and that's great, but they only might happen a couple of times a year.
Yeah.
You know, once a month. So that's great to be grateful for those things, but that's always changing. I think more for me, what helps me have a positive mindset is just trying to be conscious of living in gratitude, and that be part of my mindset, because that's also part of living each moment. Going back to, we've got time, we've got no idea how much time we've got, so we can't just wait to be grateful for the big things or the things that are working or the things that we're being successful in. You know, I can be grateful for, that's what I go back to when I'm really struggling. I go back to being grateful for the lessons. I'm grateful for this bit because it's enabling me to, and that helps reframe things.
No, I think that's so powerful, is learning to be grateful for the negative things. And that's a very difficult step to make in the beginning. And I remember for me personally, gratitude was huge when I lost my dad. And I've actually I just started a gratitude journal maybe about 6 months before. And right there, 24th July 2015, the day that I lose my dad, I've written in my gratitude journal. And to be honest, I'm not sure like what possessed me and what came over me to be still focused on writing my gratitude journal, but there was something within me that recognized how powerful gratitude was, and it's one of the biggest things that I've taken ever since then. I remember you saying with your mum that losing your mum has been one of the best things that has ever happened to you, and to the uneducated listener or someone who hasn't been through the experience, they might think, whoa, what, really? How can you say that? But I actually feel exactly the same with my dad. Like, obviously, I would love it if he was here. I would love it if he was alive. I'd love it if he was here to share the journey with me. But I wouldn't have been on the journey if I hadn't lost him, if I hadn't had that realization. For you, it's exactly the same. You wouldn't be on the journey. You wouldn't be here on this podcast interview if that hadn't happened to you. Everything that has come from that point has come as a direct result of that. And so everything that's happened in your life after that point, you can be grateful to that experience for making it happen.
Because you wouldn't want to go back and relive it, or you wouldn't want it to happen. But I think that's the transformation, taking all that pain and that sadness and that loss and turning it around into something beneficial, both for yourself and other people. And I think that's probably what I realized when you asked me about how do you go into that vulnerability. It was like, okay, it suddenly made sense of my life. I could suddenly take all that sadness and relate to people and say, you know, I'm not just being here reading from a book. I get it. I get it, what it's like to struggle in that. But I also know that you're going to be all right, because you just got to keep going. There's another life out there for you. And I think, how can you know that unless you've been in your own despair? And how do you know that if you haven't had to go through it? Horrible. Wouldn't like to do it again. Wouldn't choose it. But yeah, the gratitude is in that. And then because you come out a much richer person in lots of ways.
So we've talked a lot about death and the fragility of life in this interview.
Very true, isn't it?
Try not to be too morbid. Try to put a positive spin on it. But ultimately, we've spoken.
People have come here to listen to feel better.
I'd have to put some sunshine and rainbows in the editing process. But you know, ultimately, that's the truth, and we've spoken it, that life is precious, and we do only get one shot at this life. Whatever beliefs you have about what happens after this particular life, this particular shot, that's it. So with that focus on your own life and recognizing that you've got one shot at this life, what legacy do you want to leave after you've ultimately gone?
I would love to imagine that I've just left behind a string of people that I've helped believe in themselves enough that they can go out and do amazing things in the world and contribute to positive change. You know, I think to help people believe in themselves would just be the best thing for me. Because again, that goes back to that incredible ripple effect that isn't just in our lifetime. that also ripples down the generations, and that is how over time we change. So, you know, if I could just influence that even in only a very small way, that would just be something that would be an amazing feeling, and hope that I'm already contributing to that in the best way I can. So great just to carry that on.
Yeah, no, that's very powerful, and I'm sure you'll do it. In fact, you already are doing it, so of course you'll do it.
With my pink.
So I've just got a couple more questions for you, Ismene, and the first thing I'd like to ask is, we've talked about things like living your truth and being vulnerable, and I think this all boils down to being authentic, being the most authentic version of us. And when you look at the root of the word authentic, and you look back into the Greek roots of the word authentic, the Greek root of the word authentic is author. And so that's what I've formed all of Author Your Life around. The podcast, my work, my philosophy is all about being the author of your life and ultimately being the most authentic version of yourself. That's what it means to me, is taking up that pen and choosing to write your own story.
Yeah, very much so.
For you, what does the word authentic mean?
Again, I think for me, it's living in your truth. So it's living in, I think for me, it's about living as closely aligned to your values and what really matters to you, what really lights you up, what you're really passionate about, as closely as possible. Because I think when we're in that place of alignment, then everything that we do kind of resonates with who we really are. And then we just turn up in the world. Not that easy, because I think a lot of us have these fears, you know, and me was most of my life. I kind of crippling self-esteem. So that's been a big journey for me about just turning up who I am. But before, I would worry about that so much. So I'd be hiding this bit and trying to be perfect here and trying to be a people pleaser here. And, you know, all the things I really wanted to say, including actually I haven't got all the answers, and sometimes I struggle and I would try and hide those things. So I think for me, being authentic is not only owning our light, but also owning our darkness, because the fact that we don't always get it right, and the fact that we struggle, because the beautiful bit that I've learned is that the more authentic that I am, and the more I share my struggles and how I've come past that, the more people resonate with me. Whenever I do like a really authentic post or a blog, that's always the time people contact me and say, oh, guess what? Me too.
Yeah.
I think that's when I know that I'm being super authentic, because people resonate with that and that they feel that connection. Is that difficult? Yeah. But is it amazing? Yeah, because then, like you said, and I really get that, it is about writing your own story and choosing, how do I want to live? What makes me happy? What's my light? What am I passionate about? Not necessarily what we've been told or what we're frightened of, or yeah.
So we've talked about motivation. We've talked about purpose during this interview. What's next for you, Ismene? What's the next big challenge? What's the next big accomplishment that you want to create in your life?
On my big to-do list, I'm about a quarter or halfway through my book. That's something that is ongoing. So I'm kind of creating the life at the moment to create space in my week so I can get back to writing that book. That's been a soul calling for a while. So that's a big thing for me. And I'm going to be doing more coaching-based packages coming up in, hopefully by October. So that feels really exciting. That'll be a bit more of a structured way of working for me. So yeah, this year really feels about going back to my why, finding out what I'm passionate about. The next stage in my business, actually, which feels really exciting.
Yeah. So for people who've been listening and they've resonated with your story, they've resonated with what you've been sharing, and they'd like to find out a little bit more about who you are, what you do, how you help people, where would you direct them to find out more about you?
So if they're on social media, they can go to my Instagram, which is under Ismene Cole, or if they want to have a look on my website, it is ismenecole.com. And they can always contact me as well if they need to ask me any questions or anything resonates, or I'll always write back to people.
And just as a personal plug for your Instagram, we were talking about this earlier, Ismene has such a well-designed Instagram. Like, all the colours of all of her photos coordinate. And I was asking her before the interview, I was like, Ismene, how do you coordinate your Instagram to look so nice? Mine is like such a mess. There's like no coordination. There's no patterns at all. And so what would you say to that, Ismene? Why does your Instagram look so aesthetic?
Well, it's just me. I've got my pink and things, colours you can see there. Yeah, and all my house looks like that, so that's why. The inside of my house looks like that. It's just white and pink and grey. So, yeah, no, and I'm just naturally visual and love a good pastel colour.
So I'd recommend go check out her Instagram just to look at it and enjoy the artistry of it. So Ismene, I'd like to thank you for joining us on the podcast today, being very open, being very authentic, and really showing a lot of wisdom that's come from some really dark places. And I think when you find such wisdom going through, you called it moments of despair, that can really help other people who are going through their challenges. And that's a real gift, and not everyone can have that gift, because you need to have been in the situation and come through it to have the gift. You have those gifts, and you've given them to us today on this interview, so I'd like to thank you for that.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been lovely. I've actually really enjoyed it, so thanks, Steve.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be, because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.